The winter of 1943 cast a long shadow over Lyon, France. The city that once danced to the rhythms of art, wine, and revolution now lay shackled beneath the cold grip of Nazi occupation. The streets echoed with the boots of German patrols, and every knock at the door after dusk could mean the end of a family, a friend, or a whisper of resistance. At the heart of this quiet terror stood Avenue Berthelot, a place known not for beauty or history, but for its darkness. A building there, plain on the outside, was the Gestapo headquarters, and deep within its stone belly, past iron doors and shadowed corridors, he waited. His name would become a curse whispered through time. Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon. Barbie didn't shout. He didn't rage. His cruelty was methodical. He believed pain was a science, an art. Each confession he extracted fed his ego. Each soul broken became a feather in his cap. The resistance feared him. Civilians avoided saying his name. And inside those walls, men and women simply disappeared. One of those was Elise Laurent. She was just 27, a language teacher by trade, raised on poetry and sunsets by the Rhone. But the war had reshaped her. Elise had become a quiet courier for the French resistance. She carried coded messages inside her shoes, tucked beneath the soles. She memorized train schedules, radio frequencies, and names. She never spoke of her work to anyone, not even her younger brother, who had already been drafted. On a rainy morning in November, Elise was seized. She was crossing Place Bellecour when two plainclothes officers stepped out from a bakery and flanked her. "Just a question or two," they said. There were no questions. She was thrown into a truck, her hands bound, and driven to Avenue Berthelot. She knew what the building was. She had passed it before, heart racing, praying she would never see inside. Now she was here. The room they placed her in was cold, the walls damp and stained with something darker than mold. There was no window, no clock, no sense of time. Her hands were tied above her head, forcing her onto her knees. Every inch of her ached, but she stayed still, waiting. Then the door opened. He entered slowly, his footsteps calm, deliberate. A black uniform with sharp silver trim, SS insignia shining against the flickering light of a single overhead bulb. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, icy, dissecting, hungry, fixed on her like a hawk to its prey. "Miss Laurent," he said in fluent French, lighting a cigar. The smoke curled around his words. "I'm told you enjoy teaching. Let's see what you know." He walked a slow circle around her, his boots clicking against the concrete. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Her voice was steady, but inside her heart thundered. He knelt in front of her, lifting her chin with one leather-gloved finger. "Oh, I think you do." That was the beginning. Day after day, or what she assumed were days, she was dragged from her cell and subjected to methods she had only heard rumors of. Ice-cold water was poured over her until her body shook uncontrollably. She was slapped, kicked, burned, and denied food. Metal clamps were placed on her fingers. They tore her nails off one by one. She screamed, but she never spoke. Each time Barbie returned, he brought something new. A question, a demand, a lie. "Your brother has been captured. He told us everything. Your mother is dead. We already know what you did. We just want you to confirm it." But Elise only replied with silence or denial. Even when she passed out from pain, or woke up in a puddle of her own blood, she clung to one unspoken vow: they cannot have the names. Some of the guards mocked her. Others avoided looking at her face. She became the ghost of the prison, a story they told with nervous laughter and low voices. Barbie began to grow impatient. His interrogations turned more brutal. Once he ordered a guard to break her legs. Another time they hung her by her wrists for 16 hours. She was left nearly unconscious, her voice barely a whisper. But she never gave him what he wanted. In a rare moment, one of the young guards whispered to her through the bars of her cell. "Why don't you just tell him something?" he asked. "Anything. He'll kill you." She smiled, broken teeth and all, and replied, "If I tell him something, others die. If I say nothing, only I do." It wasn't bravery, it was choice. It was resistance. One night Barbie came in alone. He sat across from her, hands folded neatly on the table between them. She was barely able to sit upright, her body bruised and emaciated. "I don't understand you, Elise," he said. "Do you think they'll remember you when this is over?" "You're just one girl," one voice. "Your resistance? It's already dying." She looked at him through swollen eyes. Then why are you so afraid of us? Barbie stood, inhaled deeply from his cigar, and snuffed it out on the table's edge. Elise, he said, you've earned something rare. My respect. And my mercy. This will be your last night here. The door closed. She knew what that meant. She didn't cry. That night, as the guards came for her, Elise whispered a prayer. Not for herself, but for those still fighting. Those she had protected. The names still safe. The messages still sent. She had done her part. And in that she found peace. She was never seen again. But her name lived on. After the war, the building on Avenue Berthelot became a museum of resistance. Survivors told stories of the screams they heard from her cell. One cell bore her initials scratched into the stone. Her story became legend among those who had fought. A symbol of courage, defiance, and unbreakable spirit. And when Klaus Barbie was finally captured in Bolivia, decades later and tried in France, for crimes against humanity, Elise Laurent's name was read aloud in court. The names she protected. Elise Laurent was gone. The cell that once echoed with the sound of her ragged breath, her whispered prayers, and her silent defiance now stood still. The stone walls remembered, even if the guards tried to forget. They cleaned the floor, scrubbed the stains, closed the file. But outside that building, in the veins of the French resistance, her name began to move like a heartbeat. In a small apartment above a bookshop in Lyon, a man named Captain Jacques Moreau removed his glasses and lowered the curtain. He had just received the news through a coded radio broadcast. The flame at Avenue. Berthelot has gone out. Elise was the flame. She had carried messages from his network to other cells across occupied France. Quiet, steady, and always on time. Her arrest wasn't just a loss of a courier, it was the loss of a friend, of hope. Jacques stared at the fireplace. In his lap sat a small, worn notebook, Elise's. Handwriting inside, names, schedules, places, none of it in ink. It was a puzzle written in metaphors, poetry, and references only their group could decipher. Elise had memorized it all, and now everyone wondered, did she break? No, Jacques whispered aloud, almost in anger. She didn't. The others weren't so sure. Even the bravest men cracked after one night in that place. And she'd been gone for over a week. Far away, behind thick doors and stone silence, Klaus Barbie reviewed his files. Elise Laurent's name was marked with a single red stroke. Verschwunden. Disappeared. Barbie didn't think much of it. He had broken thousands. Her silence was a curiosity, but not a threat. What did she truly know? A few names? A few meeting points? It wasn't enough to stop the machine. It never was. But Barbie underestimated one thing, the way her silence became a rallying cry. In the weeks that followed, the resistance began to change. Benoit, a 19-year-old messenger, who had once panicked at the sight of a German patrol, now carried a pistol under his coat. Clémence, a nurse who only stitched up wounds, now coordinated sabotage operations on German train lines. They didn't want revenge. They wanted to honor Elise's silence. Back at Gestapo headquarters, cracks began to show. An informant named Maurice Deneuve had once given up. Resistance members in exchange for favors, food, money, protection. But Maurice had known Elise. She had saved his sister from deportation by hiding her in a convent. 2 years earlier, when he heard Elise had been taken and never returned, something inside him broke. One morning, Maurice entered Barbie's office, asking to speak in private. She didn't tell you anything, he said calmly. Barbie raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? Elise, you tortured her. She didn't tell you a single name. Barbie leaned back in his chair. And you know this. How? Maurice smiled faintly. Because I was one of the names. He pulled a pistol from his coat. The gun jammed. Barbie didn't flinch. He simply nodded, and the guards dragged Maurice away. But the message was clear. Elise's legacy had begun to rot the walls from the inside. In the countryside outside Lyon, a woman named Madame Violette, code-named Rosewood, continued Elise's work. The coded network Elise helped preserve was still alive, and now it struck back. They bombed railways carrying German arms. They ambushed convoys with stolen rifles. They smuggled out children Elise had once taught in secret. Each mission was whispered with her name. Do it for Elise. Barbie grew restless. More arrests, more interrogations. Yet no matter how many doors he kicked in, how many prisoners he took, it felt like he was chasing shadows. Then came the pamphlets, dropped from rooftops, scattered through alleyways, and even slipped beneath Gestapo car doors. They bore her name. Elise Laurent did not speak. Will you? One woman stood against the butcher of Lyon. Be her echo. You killed her body, not her voice. Barbie tore one from his windshield with trembling fingers. He hated ghosts, especially those who wouldn't shut up. By early 1944, the Allies were closing in. American troops had landed in Italy. The tide of war was turning. And inside Lyon, the resistance burned brighter than ever. That's when they found the letter. A resistance agent, disguised as a sanitation worker, uncovered a hidden compartment inside a wall during a repair near Avenue Berthelot. Inside, a small folded piece of cloth, blood-stained. Wrapped in it, a note. The handwriting was weak, scrawled in pencil, barely legible. If this reaches anyone, no, I never gave them what they wanted. The names are safe. France will breathe again. EL. The cloth was sent to London. It was real. The resistance now had its final proof. Elise Laurent had died for silence, but her words were now the loudest thing in Lyon. And then, just as history would demand, justice turned its gaze on Klaus Barbie. It didn't happen right away. In fact, after the war, he escaped, helped by the rat lines and protected by powerful allies. He fled to Bolivia, changed his name, lived openly. For years, the world forgot. But Elise's story didn't. French prosecutors, activists, and survivors built a case, one file at a time, one photograph, one scream remembered. And finally, in 1983, Klaus Barbie was captured and extradited to France. In 1987, at his trial in Lyon, just minutes from the same streets he once walked with unchecked power, her name was spoken aloud. Elise Laurent, said the prosecutor. Tortured, disappeared, never returned. She told you nothing, but she told us everything. Survivors wept. Her brother, now gray-haired, stood in the gallery holding the last photograph he had of her. A young woman laughing in the sun, holding a book. Klaus Barbie showed no emotion, but the court did. He was convicted of crimes against humanity. Life imprisonment, no parole. The child in the convent. The courtroom had fallen silent. As Klaus Barbie sat behind the thick glass in his trial, his eyes locked forward, unmoved, untouched, as the names of the dead rolled across the air like thunder. But when Elise Laurent's name was spoken, something shifted. Not on his face, but in the room. It was as though the weight of her silence had finally found its voice. Among the crowd sat a young woman in her early 40s, dressed in a dark coat, her hands shaking ever so slightly. Her name was Marie Fournier, but once, long ago, she had been known only as the child in the convent, and Elise Laurent had saved her life. 1942, 1 year before Elise's capture. The war had torn through the countryside like fire through dry grass. Trains full of Jews left Lyon nightly, under the watch of the Gestapo. One night, Elise stood in a dim apartment, her hands wrapped tightly around a small girl of about 6. The child didn't cry. She simply stared, hollow-eyed, clutching a tattered cloth rabbit. "This is Marie," Elise whispered to the 2 nuns standing in the candlelit doorway of the convent. "She's not on any list, not yet. But if they find her, they will take her, please." The older nun took Marie's hand and gently nodded. "You must go," she said, "now." Elise leaned down, kissed Marie's forehead, and pressed the small rabbit into her hands. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "One day you'll see the stars again." Then she vanished into the fog. Back to 1987, the trial. Marie had never forgotten those words. She hadn't spoken them in decades. She'd grown up in silence, changed her name, rebuilt her life. But when she saw the trial announced in the papers, her hands trembled. Not because Klaus Barbie was on trial, but because Elise Laurent's name was finally being spoken aloud. Marie requested to testify. The court didn't expect her. She wasn't a resistance fighter. She wasn't a soldier. But when she stood before the tribunal, holding the old rabbit in her hands, the entire room leaned in. "I was 6, she began, voice fragile but clear. "They were coming. My parents were gone. I was hiding in a basement in Vienne. Elise found me. I don't know how she knew, but she came for me." She paused, looking at the man behind the glass. "She carried me for miles, dressed me like a boy, called me Jean-Luc whenever we passed a checkpoint. She gave me her coat. She hadn't eaten for days, but she gave me half of her bread. And then she left me with the sisters. She told them to say I was mute, that I had no name." Marie took a breath. "And I survived. Because of her. Because she never gave me up, even when they took her." The courtroom didn't applaud. It didn't need to. The silence itself was holy. Back in the prison, Klaus Barbie said nothing. He never looked at her. But the air around him had changed. For the first time, the ghosts were no longer silent. Meanwhile, in Lyon, present day, far from the courthouse, in the quiet hills outside the city, an old man knelt in a garden. He was in his 80s now, his hands spotted with age, but his memory sharp. Captain Jacques Moreau had outlived them all, friends, comrades, enemies. And now, for the first time in decades, he took out the old notebook. Elise's notebook. Inside it were names, but not names of traitors or operations. These were the names of every person Elise had protected: children, families, villagers, priests, shepherds, even 2 German soldiers who had deserted and begged for mercy. He flipped to the last page. There, in Elise's handwriting, faint and fading, "Even if I fall, may they rise." Jacques closed the book. He had spent years blaming himself for recruiting her, for not getting her out in time. But as he watched the news on television that night, Barbie's sentencing, Elise's name being carved into history, he felt a strange thing settle in his heart. Not peace, but purpose. A whisper through generations. Elise Laurent never had children, but in a way she became a mother to a movement. Across France, young students studied her name. Streets were renamed. Poems were written. Schools taught her story, not just as a martyr, but as a mirror. Because in Elise, they saw what courage looked like when no one was watching. They saw what one life could hold. Back in the courthouse, final day of the trial. As the verdict was read, Barbie sat motionless. Life imprisonment, the judge declared. No chance of release. For crimes against humanity, for the deaths of thousands, for the torture of innocents, for the disappearance of Elise Laurent. Marie stood in the back, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. And then slowly, she stepped forward. One step at a time, until she stood, just meters from the glass box. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply held up the small cloth rabbit, now faded and worn. And Barbie, cold, defiant, unblinking, finally looked away. Final scene, a monument in stone. 10 years later, a new stone was laid in the center of Lyon, just outside the Resistance Museum. It was simple, modest, but eternal, carved into its surface. To Elise Laurent, she never gave them the names. But she gave us a voice. Beneath it, in fine lettering, "The child she saved now teaches the children of France, Marie Fournier." And on certain quiet nights, when the wind moves just right through Avenue Berthelot, old caretakers swear they can still hear footsteps. Not boots, not guards, but the quiet, steady steps of a young woman carrying hope through a world on fire.